All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to spend with me today to talk about cybersecurity, and particularly as it relates to those of us who are in business and business leaders. So my name is Jesse Hill. I'm the president of Tier 3 IT Solutions. This is what we call our brand commitment, which you'll see is very much about, connecting with people, building relationship, helping you leverage technology to enhance efficiency and profitability. And our third sentence here is all about helping you to secure your business and your data and the technology that you're using. And that's a big part of what we're talking about here today. And at the end of the day, our business exists to help build stronger businesses for ourselves and for our clients and for our communities. So we believe strongly that technology is a strategic tool in your business to help you achieve business goals. There are solutions that technology can offer to help you overcome business challenges. And importantly, across our entire client base, no two strategies are the same. So we always have to be willing to tweak them. So our content here today is very heavily about cybersecurity, and you'll notice when we sent out the invitations for this webinar that this is a series. Our intention is to run a session every 2 weeks, and in each of those, we'll be touching on different components of cybersecurity. Today, we're going to focus it's the beginning. So we're talking about why cybersecurity is important. We're going to talk about some of the types of threats that are facing businesses in the technology field. And we'll start setting the stage for our next sessions, which are a little bit more in detail about what you can do to help improve cybersecurity in your organization. Again, full disclosure, there's a lot of content here, and we've worked hard on getting this put together, and we'll be happy to share this with you all afterwards. But the reality is that when we talk about cybersecurity and cybercrime, it's growing exponentially. We're finding that more and more business owners are concerned about cybersecurity. They're hearing about it in the news, they're reading about it online. They probably have had some kind of experience with it. Not only is cyber attacks and cybercrime becoming more frequent and more commonly seen, they are having a larger impact. We'll see down here the average cost of a data breach is being reported at just under $150,000, and it's probably a U.S. number. The scary thing about this is that 51% of small businesses still don't have any defined budget for cybersecurity. Many of our clients and many of you on this call, we've gone through cyber insurance applications, and there's always a thing in there about, are you going to spend more or less? And the reality is that we all need to get ourselves in a mindset where this is something that we're investing in to help cut down our risk. And when we get into it, we start finding out that many organizations, not only are they not allocating budget, but they're not, proactively thinking about how they're doing even some of the basic things. I was really shocked when I saw this of how many organizations don't have endpoint protection, meaning antivirus solutions. We still meet businesses, that become clients that don't have a backup solution in place. And this is particularly troublesome because, as we know, these attacks are getting more sophisticated and causing more damage. We see in the bottom right-hand corner here, one of the big ones, over 91% of attacks are initiated by email. And we'll talk a little bit about that, on the coming deck here. So like I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity threats. And the most common entry point of these attackers is through email. And there's two ways that they go about, taking advantage of people out there. One is through the spray and pray method, right? And this is the traditional phishing model where somebody has acquired a list of email addresses. usually from a compromised source on the dark web, or maybe they found a distribution list online. And it's the spray and pray model, where you get a quite obviously canned message that goes out to tens or hundreds of thousands of people all at once. It's fairly unsophisticated, and they're usually trying to trick you into clicking a link and sharing information, usernames, passwords, those types of things. The other side of the phishing, where we're seeing a lot more activity, is what's called spear phishing. Now, I think you can infer from putting spear in front of there that it's much more targeted. This is when they typically have done a little bit more research, where they've gone onto your website. They've found out who the CFO is or who the CEO is. They've gone on LinkedIn. Maybe they're running a couple of campaigns at the same time, and they're getting to the point where they are actually wanting to learn about your specific activities. I use the example all the time of just picking up the phone and calling a business and asking for the controller. If I did that every single week throughout the year, eventually the person who answers the phone is going to say, sorry, they're away for a couple of weeks. Well, now I know that I can, start working on my particular attack. And these types of attacks are getting much more common, where up to 80% of security incidents are being traced back to some form of phishing. So we're going to talk later about in later sessions, about how to protect your organization against these threats. Today is just a bit of an overview of the main ones. A distributed denial of service attack, or a DDoS. This is one that it is fairly common, but it's very difficult for a small business to, first of all, even identify that it's happening to them, or assess what the impact of it is. We saw this a couple of years ago. Essentially the internet on the entire East Coast of the US went offline for the better part of a day because of this denial of service attack. And what essentially happens is people, they go out, they find vulnerable technology out in the world, they infect it with malware, and they program it so that at a certain date and time, all of those devices will flood a specific web server with traffic so that it gets overwhelmed and has to shut itself down. We don't see this, again, typically affecting small businesses like most of us are operating on here. But we did see it last summer, where many of the large voice over IP phone services were offline, and the denial of service, they were holding them hostage, trying to get a ransom out of them for that. The people who measure these things are saying that these attacks are increasing, again, exponentially, up 55% over last year. You may have heard of something called a man-in-the-middle attack, and this is essentially where you are accessing a service somewhere. This is, I think, typically where people start to talk about the risks of using public Wi-Fi, in coffee shops or airports, or anywhere where you're uncertain about the authenticity and the security on that network. And the concept with this is that somebody else on the network can run certain protocols that monitors the traffic between your computer and a web service. And what they want to do is they want to intercept that and eventually reroute the traffic through their server instead, and capture everything that's happening in the middle. The reason that they're going to do this is that they want to grab that information, whether it's usernames or passwords or credentials of some type. And then they're going to take and they're either going to use it for their own purposes, or they're going to sell it on the dark web, or do something like that. These have to be, these are typically very targeted attacks. The scary part is that many, like a high number of web servers online, they do have a vulnerability. And this is why you're going to start seeing a much bigger push towards web pages having that HTTPS and the little lock symbol on them. Those are ones that you want to make sure anytime you're visiting a key website that you have that security component included in that connection. Malware is a very broad term, and many different kinds of attacks fall into this. We see them listed here and a little bit more detail. But over the years, I think we've all come to understand that there are these things called viruses or malware that can get into our computers. Now, more often than not, malware requires somebody to open an attachment or download something from a web page or somehow execute that program. Once it's running on your computer, depending on your patch levels and your antivirus solutions and all of those types of things, will determine what it does next. But the key with this is that they generally require a user activity. So user training, making sure that people are only opening attachments that they are expecting and that they recognize and that they know are safe are going to be important, as well as making sure you have proper controls behind the scenes. One of the stats that we see on the IT side of things a lot is that it takes a long time generally for an organization to even recognize that they have one of these types of infections. And the reason for this is that when these people are designing these attacks, they're very rarely a smash and grab. More often, what they want to do is they want to live in your environment. They want to extend their reach as much as possible to either extract data or spread their attack to have a maximum impact. We've got this stat here that there's been a 6 times increase in cybercrime since COVID-19. And this is something that we can attest to, not necessarily that there's a big jump in cybercrime, but what we would call the attack surface of the typical network is much larger today than it was 3 years ago. And that's just simply because pre-COVID, everybody came to work in a specific building, connected to a server, used a company-owned device, and now instead of being 20 people in one office, we have 20 home networks. People are using personal devices. There's all kinds of things going on out there that are having a negative impact on the security of many organizations. Drive-by attacks. So this is actually, I believe, likely the second highest rate of infection that people run into behind phishing attacks. And what ends up happening here is that people will build web pages that look like legitimate websites. And they go to all of the efforts of mimicking images and text and links and content. They'll even register domains that are very similar. And when they have a website that looks like a legitimate one, they will start advertising them. They will buy paid advertisements on certain websites. They will include links in those phishing emails. And they generally work on the idea that they want to trick you into trusting their content. They're going to also do it by finding vulnerable web pages and infecting them with malware so that as you visit them, you end up downloading that content and ending up exploited in one way or another. The important thing on these types of attacks is that user awareness, I've already mentioned it a couple of times, is a big part of raising your security level, making sure that we have patch management, that we have antivirus, that we have all those things in place is going to help to protect you and your organization. And then passwords. We've talked about these many times with our clients, and the whole concept is that when you go to a web page that has sensitive information, you need to enter a username and a password in order to get into it. And as users, we all know that we have dozens, if not 100, passwords that we've had to save and figure out how to manage. Now, what happens is that hackers get into these websites, they steal usernames and passwords, and then they build programs to go out and run these other attacks to try to use them to get into financial websites and information websites. And the problem with this is that a high number of people reuse passwords. And so this is one for any of our clients on the call that we would highly recommend that there is a password manager that you have endorsed or enforced with your staff. We have a solution that we're rolling out that we'd like to talk to anybody on the call about, so we can take that off on another call. But the concept with it is that it's highly unlikely that anybody can remember unique passwords for all of their sites. So what you want to do is you want to use a password manager with a strong multi-factor authentication so that you can have unique randomized passwords for every single website that you log into rather than duplicating across all of them. You see 98% of cyber attacks rely on some kind of social engineering. And so that social engineering is just about understanding the person that you're attacking, collecting information from multiple sources, and then using that to create a profile of how you're going to compromise them. So some interesting facts. Who falls for phishing emails? IT is on here. 8% failure rate amongst IT people. But we see at the other end, we've got facilities, quality, marketing, and finance on here as well. And I don't know, I would assume that on the facility side, maybe they're not using computers quite as much, so they're not as familiar with what a fraudulent email might look like. But the fact that finance and IT and purchasing are on this list at the levels that they are tells us that the people that are designing these attacks have gotten to a level of sophistication where they are able to bypass people who should know better. Ransom response by sector. So this is basically showing us that when there is a ransomware attack, what area are they going after? We see high impact in insurance, consumer goods, telecom. Again, they're just moving a ton of data. They are a very valuable target when they can get into those types of organizations. I found this one really interesting, rates of password reuse. And so this is which industries, what kind of staff are reusing passwords on a regular basis. And we see healthcare, education, public services on here. I can attest, healthcare, boy, they're a group of people that they move around a lot. And unfortunately, that idea of maintaining a high level of cybersecurity is a challenge for them in those environments. Cyber insurance payments. So what this is basically saying is that not every claim that gets put in gets paid by the cyber insurer. So the important thing is that when you are filling out your cyber insurance applications, first of all, that you are accurate on your application. You don't want to end up in a situation down the road where there is a claim and your insurer comes back and says, well, you said yes to this and you actually did not have that. So we're going to deny your claim. You also want to make sure that your insurer understands the risk that they are covering. I can attest to this that, for the last 5-6 years, every year we got our renewal, we had a minimum 30% increase. And I would go back to our insurer and say, I don't think you guys understand what you're insuring. Are you sure you're charging us enough? And they always thought that that was strange, but I wanted to make sure that if we ever needed them, that they understood and that they would cover a claim that might get put in. Who was breached? We see, and this is going to be consolidated out of the US as well. Lots on healthcare, lots on finance, and we're seeing a lot more critical infrastructure. Down in the US, they had that big pipeline ransomware attack, and the meat packers, and many others that they've have made the news. And the thing is that the breaches that are reported in the news are a small fraction of the total, scope of what's happening out there. Ransom payments have skyrocketed in the last 10 years, but in the last 3 in particular, we see here that the average went up 82%, from 100,000 to up to 600,000. Now, these numbers, I believe, are going to be skewed because we get those, the Colonial Pipeline, I think they paid, 15 million or something, and the meat packers paid 5 million. And so you get a couple of those really big ones that make the news, that drive these numbers up. There would also be many that are in the, smaller, under 100,000. But the point is that these ransom attacks, they are in this to make money. They want to get paid, so they do their best to make sure that there's a reason for them to collect that ransom. And this is just saying, the 73% of the firms that are, part of these surveys have a very to extremely concerned rating around cyber and cloud security. All right, what we're going to talk about next, we're just going to set the stage for our next session, which is in 2 weeks. A lot of content in these. I've got my Q&A open here, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them in, and I'll bounce over there. But we're going to set the stage. In our next session, we're going to spend more time talking about what are some of the things that you can do to help protect your organization. These concepts here are coming out of what are called the CIS controls. So offense informs defense, which is really about making sure that you are thinking proactively about how your systems are designed, what you're implementing, how you're training your people. The best defense is a good offense. If you choose to wait to invest in cybersecurity, chances are you're going to have 2 or 3 investments to make to catch up. Prioritization. The reality is cybersecurity is a journey, not a destination. And what we mean by that is that there is no finish line. You will never be able to say, we're cybersecurity, we are done. So you have to prioritize. You have to look at what are the highest risk and easiest gaps to fill. Start there first. Measurement and metrics. There's no point putting systems into place if you can't measure them. And we can help you if you have questions about any of the reporting and those types of things you'd like to see. Continuous diagnostics and mitigation. Again, this is about recognizing that and it ties in with automation. When we all go to bed, our computers are still on. The internet is still on. The people that are trying to attack our infrastructure and our businesses are still working away. So we need to make sure that we have systems in place to monitor, to update, to patch, and to automatically fight off or lessen the impact of a cyber attack. So when we talk next time, we're going to go into more detail about the CIS controls. And the CIS controls, you can Google them if you want. There's 20 of them, and these are items that they have ranked that they say, every business should look at implementing, a certain number of these depending on your dependence and threat risk tolerance. But it's built around this, what's called the NIST framework. And so in the NIST framework, we have 5 modules. We have identify, which is all about understanding what you have, where it is, who's using it, how old it is, all of those types of things. Protect is all about putting in those systems that are designed to limit control, to limit access, to back information up, protect it from risk. Detect is that monitoring, making sure that if there is a breach, that it's not 66 days before you find it, but maybe 6 hours or 6 minutes or whatever that level of tolerance is for your organization. Respond. So this is about having an incident response plan, about people on your team knowing how to react to a cyber incident, who to talk to, what to say, who's involved, and often called incident response plan. And then the recover component is how do you get out of back into normal operations. Okay, boy, that was a lot of content in 27 minutes. We only have a couple minutes left. So does anybody on the call have any questions that they would like me to review, go back to, dig a little bit deeper on? I'm happy to hang out here and chat with you all for a little while longer if you'd like to. Okay, not seeing a lot on there. In 2 weeks, we're going to start diving deeper into the individual CIS controls and give as close to real world examples that we can of how we can help you implement those in your business and how you can put them on yours. Okay, Colleen. So she'd like me to elaborate on password security to avoid duplication. And it sounds probably daunting to some people, and some people it sounds like it makes a lot of sense. But the concept here is that every single website or software package or anything that requires a username and a password, that the password that you use is unique in every single site. And when I say unique, years ago, we might have recommended that you have a base password that is, slightly modified depending on what site you're going into. Today, the best practice is a completely randomized password. So the challenge with that is that when you say, all right, Colleen, here's the 15 web pages that you use on an ongoing basis, I want you to come up with a random password for them. The human brain can't design and remember, 5 unique passwords, let alone 15. So that's where a password manager comes in. Essentially, the way that it works is when you are in your browser, you go to a web page, it recognizes that you're at tdbank.com. And it has an encrypted password vault where it stores, the 15, 50, 75 passwords that you use, and it injects it into the web page. In order to get into that password vault, you have a username and a strong password and a 2-factor code. And again, the concept there is that you only have to remember one password to get into that vault. And then you have access to all of your random, unique, encrypted passwords to use in those other sites. I'm happy to get together with you and show you how that works. Any other questions? Okay. And also, I'm open to feedback. I mentioned to you all that this is my first time going through delivering this content. I know it's a lot, and I hope that it was valuable for you to come here today. The next couple of sessions will be probably a little bit more tangible of how you can take this and use it in your planning and in your business. So if you have any feedback, feel free to shoot me an email, and I will definitely take it into consideration for the next session, which is in 2 weeks. All right, and I'm going to stop the recording.